All right, everyone, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Choose the Right Risk Intelligence and Emergency Communications Solution. My name is Bethany Cowan, and I am the Content and Communications Manager here at AlertMedia, and I'll be your moderator for today. So now, why we're all here. Today's discussion is all about helping you evaluate potential partners in risk intelligence and emergency communications, and ultimately select the right provider for you that helps suit your unique needs. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to today's speakers today. First is Ben Schneider. Ben is the Vice President of Product here at AlertMedia, and Ben is responsible for defining the company's product vision and roadmap. Ben has worked in product development for over 20 years and has led product teams for organizations of all sizes, from early stage startups to publicly traded companies. And his experience in driving product innovations really spans all industries and technologies, including mass communications, social media, travel, artificial intelligence. He's got great experience, and we're super excited to have him. Hi, Ben. Thanks for being
Hi,
here.
thanks. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
So excited to dive in. I would also like to introduce Peter Steinfeld. Peter has been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years, and he's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions here at AlertMedia, where he works closely with a wide range of organizations to support their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast, our interview series here at AlertMedia, and recent episodes include conversations with leaders from the United Nations, Starbucks, the Washington Commanders, and more. So we're super excited to have him. Hey, Peter, glad to have you.
Great to be here. Looking forward to this content today.
Me too. All right. So before we officially dive in, we're going to start with a poll here today. Oh, excuse me. Poll's on the next slide. We've got a poll coming soon, so stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we'll dive into a poll. So quick items on the agenda here for today. We will discuss some current threat trends that are impacting organizations today, how to assess your organization's needs, and then ultimately tips for evaluating risk intelligence and emergency communication partners. And then finally, how to ensure a seamless switch once you've actually made your selection. So here's that poll I talked about. So before we dive in, I would love to hear from each of you here today. How can we tailor the discussion to your specific needs? So take a moment, answer this question for us, please. Which of these best describes your current need for risk intelligence and emergency communication? Either I don't currently have a solution in place, or I currently have an emergency communication solution, but not threat intelligence, missing that threat intelligence piece, or you currently have a risk intelligence solution, but not emergency communication, or you have both, but you're kind of weighing your options and you're looking to learn more. So we're gonna give folks about 30 more seconds to answer here. Got some
This is
responses coming
super
in.
helpful to get this feedback, just because as we go through the content, we'll just get a sense of where you are in your journey and your process, and it'll help us just maybe change up our comments a little bit.
Absolutely. All right, and it looks like we've got our answers here today, so I'll go ahead and share those results. Perfect. All right, so it looks like we've got a little bit of a mixed bag here today. Peter, what do you think of our responses here so far?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess, not unusual when we're talking to a large group of folks that it's going to kind of spread out like this, but we'll make sure to cover the material from the perspective of everyone who's coming in with different configurations today. So this is great. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, whether you're looking to upgrade or looking to potentially reconsider, weighing your options, or coming at it fresh, hopefully this will provide good context all the way around.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to go ahead and dive into our discussion here today. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Peter, who's going to get us started on the current trends impacting threat organizations today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bethany. We won't spend too long on this section, but as we were preparing the material, I thought it would be just helpful to cover a few threat trends that are impacting organizations today, and really like probably most of you in the audience. So this should resonate. So getting into it, according to a recent study from the Gun Violence Archive, over the past about 3 to 5 years, we've experienced nearly 2 active shooter events on average every day in the United States. And 49% of active shooter events occurred at or perhaps surrounding private businesses, which was really forcing organizations to maintain a state of perpetual awareness, something that we didn't really have so much in the past. And cybersecurity incidents are also on the rise. Ransomware payments in 2023 surpassed the $1 billion mark. That's the highest number ever observed. So organizations are just exposed to way more cyber risk than ever before. And the healthcare sector actually is also consistently the biggest victim of US ransomware attacks. And then as you see here, there's extreme weather and natural disasters. 2023 happened to be the hottest year on recorded record, and also the single most active year for inclement weather in recorded history based on the volume of billion-dollar disasters. A lot of billions going on here, which is not good in our industry. Then, as we think about all the geopolitical uncertainty that we're seeing out there, organizations are really feeling the worldwide impacts of global conflicts through disruptive demonstrations and supply chain issues and things like that. Just a point of fact, the AlertMedia global intel team sent over 9,000 activism and civil unrest type alerts in 2023 alone, which was a pretty staggering 43% increase from 2022, so just a year before. And we're actually expecting even more this year, as it's the biggest global election year in the history of mankind, which will certainly have an impact on the number of demonstrations that we're seeing worldwide. So get ready. Next slide is organizations definitely also experiencing an additional layer of complexity when mitigating threats for this increasingly dispersed workforce that we all have to contend with. For organizations with remote or hybrid employees, the number of and locations where work is taking place could change daily. It's not static like it used to be. When people are out in the field or moving among job sites, all those lone workers seem to be in constant motion, which makes keeping them informed and safe much more complicated than someone who comes to the same place every day. And then lastly, business travel. It's back to pre-pandemic levels, but now there are a lot more airline industry disruptions, as well as physical and cybersecurity risks for the travelers out there, more than we've ever seen before. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that the duty of care expectation extends to wherever your employees are, in the office, at home, or on the road. Then there's the matter of keeping up with all this compliance out there as new safety and security standards and regulations roll out every year. It really does seem to be never ending. It's all for the good, they say, to keep people safe. But the ones you see on this slide are the ones that we hear quite a bit, quite frequently from our customers. So you got California Senate Bill 553, which mandates that every business in the state of California has a workplace violence prevention plan. You'll probably notice that creeping into other states as well in the near future. OSHA, often releasing new regulations, as well as things like national emphasis programs like heat illness and fall prevention. Then you've got the California Consumer Privacy Act and the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, both regulating how businesses handle and safeguard people's personal data. And then finally, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It's information, communication, and technology risk management, basically a framework for the EU's financial sector. So all these standards play a really key role in keeping organizations safe and secure, like I mentioned before, but there's no question that they're just an added layer of challenge and burden on leaders like you to keep up with and comply with among all the other responsibilities that you have. So hopefully that gave some good context into why it's important to have a really good and easy to use system. So what I'll do now is turn it over to Ben, who's going to talk to us about how organizations are currently managing operational risk and then all the challenges that they're facing in doing so. So Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Peter. Keeping employees informed of threats that are impacting them at any given point in time is more complex than ever because there are more critical events occurring and the events are more impactful. Organizations are facing simultaneous emergencies around the globe, multiple events happening at one time that they have to jump between and manage the impact of that, the communication, all of the different action plans that have to go into place. Open source intelligence yields an avalanche of information, but it yields a lot of misinformation and disinformation, or simply at the very least, a lot of things that aren't verified or likely even irrelevant to your organization. So ultimately, this means there's a lot of noise. And with a volume of threats that is too great to assess and understand accurately and communicate manually at any given point in time. So here's a little visualization to help put things into perspective. there are these threats that we just talked about going up in volume and intensity and over time, no matter how you measure them, whether it's just according to the sheer number or the magnitude in terms of dollars impact and so on. It's going up and it's ever increasing and intensifying. At the same time, we're stacking on more expectations for teams managing this operational risk. They have more expectation to protect employees, to keep the business consistent, to resilient, to maintain uptime, to be compliant, and to protect the business overall from these increasing threats and the exposure that could happen to the organization, either in terms of productivity or reputation or a combination of both. Add on to that there's a challenge in the folks that are in this position for what they're facing. The capacity to stay on top of these events is not growing at the same space and at the same pace as the actual events are happening, the threats that are out there, and the expectations. We hear from leaders all the time of how they are under pressure to do more with less. Their charters are growing, but their teams are largely staying the same. And they're forced to navigate different disparate tools. Their data is in siloed systems, which means it may take extra time to identify an event, communicate the folks that are actually impacted after assessing that, and then carrying that through to resolution. Ultimately, they tell us they're not able to be effective at monitoring all of the events and threats that are happening in the world that could potentially be impacting them. So this leaves us with the sad reality of a widening gap of risk exposure, and that affects business continuity, the safety of the people and assets for that organization, and the reputational risk for the company and brand. To deal with this, the options are either to add more resources or accept more risk. The truth is that organizations can't afford this level of risk exposure in today's business landscape. That means the ways to overcome this widening gap of risk exposure while maintaining a quick response are by adding more full-time employees, which is not sustainable or in some cases even feasible, or upgrading their technology investments to scale their capacity to stay on top of all of these continually increasing risks and expectations. Adding to that challenge is that the existing systems they do have are no longer sufficient for a number of reasons. We hear from folks all the time that if they do have a system, there are challenges with executing. Some of those include the fact that they're complex and clunky. It's maybe difficult to implement or use or to train new employees on, or additional people in the organization that you want to delegate access to. Sometimes people are intimidated to use the tool because it seems too complex, or they don't feel comfortable with it. They're not in it every day. And this means a lack of widespread adoption as well. Sometimes you're jumping between multiple login screens, multiple reset passwords. That will slow you down or even introduce more room for error whenever speed is and time are of the essence and a critical event is occurring. And these products are often siloed. One product to be aware of an event that's happening, another one to assess that impact and how it will potentially challenge the safety or resilience of the organization, and then another to communicate that information out and activate information around what to do and actions to take. Oftentimes, the performance is unreliable. Data and delivery failures will impede communication. Speed and performance aren't adequate to respond quickly, or it doesn't scale well to the growing needs and size of the organization. Sometimes there can be a frustrating lack of support in a few different ways. This could be no live support for the actual technology platform during an emergency. You have to jump through lengthy how-to documents or videos, not really helpful whenever time is of the essence. Or maybe you're passed around to different support teams. Or even just not situational expertise around the particular thing that you're trying to address or achieve at any given point in time. There are also issues with the platforms being unpredictable. A lack of transparency around changes when there may be downtime or upgrades that are happening that can impact your use and hit at exactly the wrong time. Hidden fees or surprise price increases whenever there's functionality you need that would help you do your job more efficiently, but now you're having to pony up more budget for that. Ultimately, you get what you pay for. So I'll pause here because I think now we have another poll for the audience, right, Bethany?
Yes, absolutely. We'll go ahead and launch this poll. Thank you both for getting us set up here and a little bit of the why and the importance of having a great emergency communication threat intelligence solution. So I'd love to take a moment now to understand from each of you, what are the current threat trends that are of the highest concern for you? Is it this rising number of threats that we're seeing, this kind of increasingly dispersed workforce, the complexity really that's coming through with all these new compliance standards that Peter talked about? the pressure of scaling internal operations, or really just this kind of unreliable legacy solutions, some of the clunkiness and the siloedness and the support issues that we were hearing from Ben there. So we've got a variety of responses coming in, but looks like we've got time to grab a few more. Thank you all for getting those thoughts in.
I'm afraid there's no all of the above option. We're forcing you to pick a single choice here. Sorry.
Yes, I know. I thought of that just as these were coming through. It might be all of the above for
Which of
everybody
these
here.
is the most to you?
Right, right.
Which hurts the most?
Hated those questions. Those are the worst.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've got some time to grab just a few more responses. All right. So we'll go ahead and share these results now. Wow, how about that? Peter, what are your initial thoughts on these responses?
The one that took the cake here is the rising number of threats. And I think that slide, hopefully you guys took screenshots of it. If not, I believe we're going to share it out with you folks after the webinar. But that slide that Ben showed, just showing the rising number of threats and then your capacity to deal with them. And you're going to have to do something about it. That line is quickly being crossed. So I get it. Like, it makes total sense, but some of these other ones are represented as well. So that's great. We'll talk about all this as we move through.
Yeah,
not
Ben.
surprised at all. Also, the unreliable legacy solutions being seconds, not surprising at all, especially in the conversations that we're hearing.
Yeah.
100%. All right. Thank you all for that. We will move forward now with our next section, which is how to assess your organization's needs. I'll go ahead and kick it back over to Peter.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bethany. Really appreciate it. So we'll start on the first slide in this section here, talking about communication needs. So this is where you should really clearly identify the who, the what, and the where of every stage of communication before you take these needs to a potential vendor, because some vendors have strength in certain areas and others have strengths in other areas. And you really need to define that who, what, and where. So what does that mean? Well, it's important to document the number of people that you need to communicate with. Is it the entire organization, or is it just a subset of folks? And then where are they located? Does everyone routinely work out of a consistent location? And how many of your folks are maybe hybrid or remote or traveling? Do you have people all just in the United States? Are they international? What does that spread look like? Because there's different complexities with communicating with different folks, in different situations. Another good thing to think about is the incidents and events that you might experience, and then determine which might require communication. So some organizations only communicate about like really the most critical incidents and emergencies that hamper them, while a lot of others out there communicate more regularly about just general business disruptions, drills, and things like that. Also, which channels do you rely on? Email alone, not enough. I think probably everyone that's shown up to this webinar today knows that. But just adding SMS texting isn't necessarily enough anymore either. So think about including more channels like computer pop-ups, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp if you have international presence, because that's really popular outside the US. You want to add a lot into the mix to make sure you can reach folks. And then another thing to think about is if there's any special accommodations that you're going to require. A great deal of emergency notifications are sent to people when they're not at work. So then the traditional channels of like texting and email work just fine, voice calls. But some organizations do have things like warehouses or manufacturing facilities where personal devices aren't allowed, at least officially. People shouldn't have them. So maybe you need to broadcast a message over a loudspeaker or on monitors posted throughout the facility. And then lastly here, give a really good amount of consideration to which teams can and should be involved in emergency communication. If you want and need a lot of folks to be able to send messages, you should pick a system that's very easy to learn and use, or people will be too afraid to do so. Frankly, the more you can distribute the power of a system like this to people that are local to the incident, that really know what's going on, as opposed to trying to manage it all with just a few authorized users who might be really far away and don't know what's going on, the better your outcome's going to be. Now, after this, you're going to want to think about how you're identifying the threats that you are going to communicate to your people. So specifically, who's going to verify the intelligence that you receive? There is a tremendous amount of dis, and irrelevant information floating out there, like Ben was talking about at the very beginning. So just ask yourself, Does your team have the capacity to sift through thousands or even tens of thousands of these signals and alerts every day to understand what's real and what's not, what's impactful versus what's not? Or could you benefit from the assistance of a vendor with a team of expert analysts to just do this for you and then forward through stuff that's been fully vetted, dramatically reducing what you got to look through? Also to consider, not every piece of information you receive requires an actual response. So you got to think about who on your team is going to make the call to instruct your people to actually take action. It should be a fairly tight team and process. And then sometimes you're going to need it to provide updates as a situation unfolds. You know, all incidents that you experience have a beginning and an end, but a fair amount are quite fluid and they require updates over several hours as that incident lasts, or maybe even days if it's a big, long-lasting thing like a hurricane. So the question is, are you going to send those updates in the same thread where things could get buried or lost, or are you going to blast out a net new notification, which also has its complications? Or does it make sense to move the conversation to another medium? Maybe you start with a blast to people, but then you switch to like a private web page that people can then go visit at their own pace and then see all the latest about that situation. The answer really can vary depending on the organization and then the specific threat that that particular organization is experiencing in the moment. All things to think about. You should also try to understand who on your team will answer all the inevitable questions that arise related to the incident, and then be able to dig deeper as necessary. The real key question here is whether you should offload data collection and investigation to a third party, so then you can focus on the really higher value resiliency and response efforts. You go about doing resiliency and response while someone else is digging into the details and getting you those extra facts that you need. And then finally, how do you plan on reporting intelligence related to these bigger, large, sustained events to your organization's leadership? You know, things like hurricanes, wildfires that could be spreading everywhere, major demonstrations and protest, which we already talked about. We're going to see a lot more this year, and things like that, whether it's during or after the event has unfolded. The other thing is, could a potential partner, like I've been talking about throughout this, save you time by providing things like executive summaries of threats to your organization that you can then just kind of pass up to your leadership, again, freeing you up to focus on managing the situation and not have to be a data jockey trying to put a report together. So these are all very good things to think about when it comes to establishing your communication and threat intelligence requirements. All right, I think next, I'm going to hand it back to Ben to discuss the last area of internal need that you should assess before moving forward, and that's platform needs. So Ben, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Platform is often the area that people don't want to have to focus on because it's the less fun stuff, even of all of that. Where is my data? How do I hook into stuff? But in order to select a vendor that's truly right for your organization, you need to understand how a potential partner will support your unique needs when it comes to all of the ins and outs and guts of the technology. What integrations do you need to be successful? Think about how you communicate through email, SMS, Teams, WhatsApp, a lot of the examples that Peter was mentioning, or where you keep your people data, Workday, Okta, Ceridian. Do you use business continuity software like a Fusion, a RockDove, or an Infinite Blue, or security software, case management like OnTick? Do you have travel systems for your bookings that you want to integrate as well? Concur, Agencia, Navan. This is a critical piece you need to document before you select your next partner. What are all of the system interactions that potentially need to take place? What are the expectations around those? What systems are in place so you can verify that you can continue those or potentially even improve upon them as you look to make it maybe a change? Who on your team will manage a lot of these data pieces? Like who is in groups? What are the configuration of those groups? Who manages and has access to your templates and can make updates to those templates to include new information around an ever-changing, potentially security protocol or procedure? Most organizations we speak with want the flexibility to confidently delegate access and responsibilities, like limiting who can send to which groups of people, but still allowing them to send messages, and restricting access to critical data so they don't expose PII or availability of information that they shouldn't outside certain people in the organization. So with all that, it's also important to understand who will oversee the data management synchronization, maintenance, validation, verification that data is coming over and correctly, accurately, and to expectation. Finally, how do you plan to audit and report on how your organization is using the platform. What we hear most is that it is important that they understand and achieve widespread adoption for organizations at a high level of employee engagement. So you want to select a vendor that can help you report on that. You understand, is your communication being reached? Are you getting the responses that you need? Is it happening in a timely fashion? Are those that you're delegating access to actually using the system to the degree that they're supposed to? Do they feel confident? Is it easy to kind of ramp them up and maintain that level of engagement and use? So I'm going to pass it back to Peter now, who's going to outline some key requirements your next solution should meet.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. I'm pretty sure that everyone here has at least a general idea of what they require from their next provider or net new provider if you've never had it. So now what I'll do is share just a few key things that we hear from organizations that are just really an absolute requirement when it comes to risk intelligence and emergency communication. So the key to effective communication is reaching the right people at the right time, no matter where they live, work, or travel. So anywhere they are in the world. So what that means is if there's a tornado that could impact your people, you need to know exactly who is in the affected location so you can communicate with them immediately. Real-time location information and geofencing, pretty crucial here to do that because they enable you to notify only the employees within the impact zone of the emergency. During any kind of actual crisis, sending messages to people who are not impacted can actually cause confusion or panic or worse. It'll also negatively motivate them to ignore or just turn off future notifications, which then inhibits your ability to connect when something is actually impacting those folks. So you got to be real careful there. Targeting is incredibly important. Then you'll also need to know if they're okay or if they need help. So it's very essential to have two-way communication with your people so you can receive responses and status updates after you send them a message. This also helps you prioritize recovery efforts, allowing you basically to focus your limited resources, as we've been talking about, and efforts that you can put out where they're actually needed most, instead of going down rabbit holes where the effort is not necessary. Another thing you always want to consider is have multi-channel delivery, which I alluded to before. You should never rely on a single channel, like only email or only texting, because most people don't check email like they used to, especially not work email. Not everyone's paying attention to texting, especially outside the US, where things like WhatsApp and other channels are growing. There are just so many ways to reach people today that it's just impossible to know what every person is paying attention to at any given moment in time. So best practice is to communicate over many channels at once, which will dramatically improve your odds of getting information to people quickly. Could be that I pay attention to texts 364 days a year, but the one day the emergency happens, I've turned it off or I'm ignoring it. So if I got a quick voice call, it would jog, my attention, and I go, oh, okay, I see what's going on now. So multi-channel, multi-channel, multi-channel. It's so critical. And then I think this one should be a no-brainer. Make sure that you have really highly responsive human 24/7/365 system support. So there's nothing that's going to stand in your way of communicating with your people. The last thing you need during a crisis is to sit there and have to sift through like a 200-page support guide when the clock is ticking, which Ben mentioned before. Never good. When you're stressed out, last thing you want to do is to feel like you got to go learn something new. So these are just a few of the key requirements for effective communication that really every organization should absolutely consider. So now I'll hand it back again to Ben to talk about some requirements for ease of use across the organization. And ease of use is a really important thing.
I am the poster child for not using email as the primary means. I batch up all of my response. So it's definitely going to get to me through other ways faster. But thanks, Peter. Yeah, in today's threat landscape, having software that is modern and easy to use is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And unfortunately, though, it's also rare. The safety and security of your people and business depend upon this. That with minimal training, anyone in your organization can and should jump in and communicate about threats or an ongoing status of an event during a crisis. So that means having an intuitive interface across desktop, mobile, any potential device, since oftentimes when these sort of events happen, you're not always able to be sitting at your computer. You should also have a solution that speeds up your incident response time rather than add downtime or risk as you're switching between screens or siloed systems. It's also important that your organization is actually using the tool. And this is accomplished through having flexible controls from the administrative perspective roles and permissions that can empower or restrict the right people to engage in the response plan during an emergency. It's also essential to partner with a vendor that regularly innovates with new product development and features, not only to keep up with the rising threats around the world and the new needs of communication that's ever evolving, but also to include new capabilities like generative AI, where it can be beneficial, advanced mapping capabilities, new integrations, and so on. And finally, you need a solution that's built on a modern architecture. This includes the ability to have dynamic people data coming into your organization all the time, ease of management over that, a seamless integration with your existing people systems or travel systems, access control, whatever it may be. And again, this is a must-have, not a luxury. So now that we have a short list of requirements to have in hand, let's take a look at how to actually assess potential partners, Peter.
Absolutely. Just a quick comment on this, a little bit of an anecdote. I just can't reiterate how important ease of use is. I'm thinking of a customer of ours who has got offices all around the world, many different time zones, literally in like half the time zones in the world. They had implemented our solution, gave one of their people in a very distant office 15 minutes of training on how to use it. Literally the next day, a fire broke out in their building, and we were told this is one of the least technically, proficient people in the organization, was able to very quickly evacuate the building using the solution. If the system was hard to use, that never would have happened. People would have had to call back to headquarters where there was someone that could log in. There would have been delays, and by the time they got the message out, it would have been too late. So I just can't emphasize enough how important ease of use is. Just wanted to add that there before we move on.
It's a great point, and it's a difficult thing. I know whatever software I use or what I'm involved in trying to create, I always try to keep top of mind that you need freedom of flexibility without the burden of making decisions for users. And then that's a very hard thing to balance.
It is, absolutely. I know you struggle with that all the time in the product development, so. Okay, cool. So I know this is why we're all here, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So it might seem just a bit simplistic, but it's rather important to ask and compare how quickly will you be able to notify affected parties during an emergency? For example, if you receive a threat alert about an incident from your vendor relatively quickly, but then it takes you or your team 30 minutes to go out and notify all the people that are actually impacted by it, it might be too late to matter, kind of like that example I gave before. And then when you consider that you have to notify different groups, like your executive leadership team, emergency responders, and then of course, all the impacted employees who are just all dispersed throughout the affected area, this can really turn into a very uncomfortably long process when you're in the middle of a really, potentially dangerous situation. So it's important that your vendor demonstrates how quickly you can receive a threat alert, and then, just as importantly, how quickly you can turn that intel into action by notifying the impacted individuals, and then any others who need to know about it, like the responders, the executives, things like that. And remember, time is absolutely not your friend in these situations. Then it's important to think about how this new system helps you capture and then iterate on all the communication templates, employee groups, and emergency response processes that you build along the way, so you can get faster and more efficient every time you use it. You don't want to always start from scratch each time there's an incident. There should be kind of like institutional memory. There should be a product memory that you can leverage in the future so you get better and faster. And then next, you really want your whole organization to be very well acquainted with the value of emergency communication. If your system is just so clunky that it never gets used, then awareness and readiness start to drop, and it can drop to really imprudent or even dangerous levels. And that can turn an emergency response into more of a disaster instead of being like a well-oiled machine. And then finally, as you think about your next partner, they really should be able to quickly show how many people received your notifications and how they responded instantaneously. Communication doesn't only happen when a message is sent out. It's very much bi-directional in nature. Understanding that your message was received or not, and what your next steps are based on the feedback that you're receiving from the audience in real time is the actual goal. It's absolutely going to help you out in an emergency. So Ben, with that, I'll go ahead and toss it back to you to talk about why I call it intuitiveness is so critical for emergency communication software.
Yeah, this is not that far from the ease of use we were talking about earlier, but how do you measure and determine what ease of use is? Well, this is one of the ways. Is it intuitive? And it's important that your next solution is intuitive because it should be simple to navigate during an emergency for both admins and recipients, for people who are in there every day and those who maybe only experience it at certain times when their team is called into action. Intuitive means it can require minimal training to understand the basics and how to get things done. There's very clear workflows. It's very easy to understand where actions are taken and what's going to happen when you click that button. It's painless and hassle-free. That also reduces the intimidation factor, so that way you get higher adoption because people understand it and they're not, even if they're not in it every day, they're not worried about going in and understanding what they need to do to get their job done. It also empowers cross-functional response. This is through enabling more admins and delegating access and making it easier to allow as many people as necessary to access the system and not having to gatekeep that control because you're too concerned about someone doing something that sends a message out to the entire company by accident or changes all of the settings or messes up any sort of data. It also eliminates single points of failure or bottlenecks in an emergency response. If it's difficult to implement, if there's intimidation using it, if it is not clear what actions to take and what the workflow is, all of those things will add a bottleneck or potentially a point of failure. And it needs to be easily accessible from anywhere. As mentioned earlier, oftentimes when emergency unfolds or as you're acting upon it, people will be in the field or not necessarily at their desk, or it's not necessarily during office hours, and they need to continue that response process out on the go from a mobile app, from any sort of device where they can access that and make sure that the actions are taken easily from anywhere. Along those lines, it also needs to be efficient. That means it needs to be fast. As Peter mentioned before, having a lot of downtime or a lot of decision points along the way can slow you down. And in an emergency, that is the worst thing that you need to deal with. You need to be focusing on the resolution. And you want as little time as possible between knowing and assessing what is going on and communicating that to the people impacted, because otherwise it adds additional risk and strain on the organization already in trouble or handling a crisis. Your people should understand how an unfolding situation impacts them as quickly as possible and what action you want them to take in less than 10 minutes. This means your solution should reduce your incident response time, and it should automate the most time-consuming tasks. It should be easy and efficient to learn, and it should have a number of tools available for you to set up as much ahead of time before an incident actually occurs to be ready to go. Your data is ready. You can understand what sort of communication information you have for everyone, and is it up to date, and how widespread that is. Templates and responses ready to go, so that way all you have to do is provide just the most important details to this specific event, and everything else is already set. Audiences, recipients, event templates, all these different things, the groups that you want to send to can be prepared ahead of time, so that way when the crisis happens, you have as few decision points as possible to take action. Then, of course, is it reliable? You need to trust that your message will reach the right people every time, no matter where they are. One of the most critical things that we run into is, because the communication landscape is growing and getting ever more diverse, it's getting harder and harder to reach people where they are, unless you're taking on a multi-channel approach and realizing that you have to adopt multiple ways to reach your organization. That also means you need a modern architecture that's designed to scale with global organizations, both in terms of the size of the groups and the people that need to receive the message, as well as the size of those that you want inside managing different pieces of the system. Tens of thousands of messages within seconds to minutes is critical in these cases. You also need dedicated and responsive customer success with expert technical, tactical, and strategic support. So you may have questions or an issue you need to deal with on using the technology itself, but you maybe also need access to more intelligence around something that's unfolding beyond what your team can handle. And you need all of those options available for you at your disposal immediately. So to round all of this up into really some key questions, we're going to take a look at what you should ask a potential vendor. And this is a slide I highly recommend you screenshot. Yes, we will share this afterwards, but if you want to take it away now, I think this is the one that you'll really want. But wait for all of the build outs. It's probably not as useful as it will be in about 11 more builds. First of all, what does implementation look like? Nobody's going to say it's painful. Everyone will say it's easy, but you need to find out if that's really true. How long will it take? Does it take 6 months? Will your vendor charge for that implementation separate from the rest of your subscription fees? If so, that's a red flag. Implementation should be included. It should be a part of the entire process and buying the product. And you should ask your vendor if you can meet with the team who will partner with you once you sign the contract to understand who it is you'll be working with and what their process will be like. Next, will I receive training? And what will that training look like? And how does it evolve as my team grows and as my responsibilities grow as well, and I need to pull new people on board? Again, a vendor should be able to tell you who and what your training will entail, because this is the most crucial part of rolling out your new system and getting adoption buy-in. How will people be added to the system? Do I have to go add them manually one by one? Surely not. Hopefully not. Great, there's an import, but what exactly does that mean? That's not where the conversation should end. You want to explore the details of how integrations will work, how data will transfer into the system, and a quality vendor should have a smooth and automated method of importing your organization's contacts and getting them from whatever system it is that you need to pull those from, and at whatever basis makes sense for your business. All right, I'm all bought in and everything sounds great. We can get up and get going, but we're a growing organization. I have more administrators now. As I add those additional administrators and delegate more responsibility and leverage that power, are you going to charge me more for those extra admins? If you think about how companies grow by location and personnel and capabilities, you're likely over time, especially if things are going the right way, going to need to add more administrative access in the system. And you now need to understand if that's a budget consideration every single time you want to pull somebody else in to help scale your operation. If that is an added cost, are you willing to take it on? It's not one that I would want to present to my leadership where you have potentially unknown variables impacting price and budget over time. How do you ensure accurate location data for remote and traveling employees? Can you have multiple addresses for employees? So beyond just their home or their work address, what if they often use a co-working location? What if they're working out of a remote office? Is there an easy way to sync itinerary data for those that are traveling? And if so, what systems are being supported? Is there a mobile application with the option for location tracking to be enabled in that app so I can know, independent of a travel itinerary or of a home location, or in theory, where a worker may be based out of today, where they actually are if I need to reach them? How free of false positives and misinformation is your intelligence? With the ever-growing amount of social media content, there's also an increasing amount of incorrect, unverified, and outright fake, false information. We know we are under a barrage of it all the time. And with generative AI, a lot of content is completely made up and often fools other AI-driven automated systems into thinking that those are real threats. How do you prevent that? Something that you should inquire about with a vendor. Is the threat intelligence that they're bringing to you purely automated and based on artificial intelligence, or is there a human validation component? And is that important to your organization to understand that difference and exactly what role automation and humans play in getting you that intel? You need to be aware of the risks and trade-offs and benefits of all, and make sure your organization is prepared for them. What other organizations use the system? Are there other companies, organizations of similar size to you or in your region or in your industry that kind of look like you? And how recently did they switch over? What are some of the things that they've heard from those customers since making that switch? These will help you understand what your pattern will look like. What is your Net Promoter Score? Many may be familiar with this as a great way of understanding overall customer satisfaction and the level of service that a customer is receiving from a vendor. But if you're not, it's just a simplistic way that is very powerful to understand, is the product and the team behind that meeting your needs, and would you recommend that to others? And that NPS score is a really quick and a really impactful and valuable way to understand how an organization, where an organization sits with their customers. And then finally, how often do you innovate? If you sign a 3-year contract with a vendor, are you stuck with the exact same product as the day you signed up? Do you have to pay for every single upgrade? If we think about just how far generative AI has come, say in the last 12 months, that is an immense amount of progress. And if you were stuck on a version from a year ago, you would not be happy. So think about how outdated a system would be if there aren't regular improvements that are made that don't require you to invest more or upgrade every single time. So now that you've got an idea of how to assess these vendors and some key questions to ask and examples for how to apply those questions, I'm going to hand it back to Peter to talk about what to do when you've identified the vendor you want to partner with.
Absolutely. This is actually my favorite part. Couldn't wait till we got to this slide because everything we've talked about so far is just moot if you cannot get other people on board with getting a new solution or making a change. So even when you're passionate about what you want your next solution to be, it can be really challenging or even daunting just to get other stakeholders in your organization, especially leadership, to buy in on that change. And that's because change can be scary or just cumbersome to people. They often prefer to just stick with the status quo rather than make that change, even when they know that things could be obviously better. So your task is just to articulate that sticking with the status quo is actually more painful and more costly than taking a leap into a new partnership. Now, get out your pens and paper here. This is a really important point. Crucial to remember that people buy emotionally and then justify their decisions logically. So let me just repeat that in a slightly different way. The decision to buy or make a change comes from the gut. And then the justification that people make for that decision that they feel in their gut then comes from the brain. It's in that order. And that's how you have to approach folks. So be careful not to start with the features and benefits of the new solution. Nobody cares, at least not at first. Instead, you got to start with the stories and examples that demonstrate the impact to your organization that people are going to feel and understand viscerally. And then you can do that by first identifying some key challenges that you, the team, the organization at large, face as a result of your current processes and technologies. Things like being overwhelmed. Think of those slides that Ben shared earlier where the threats are increasing, but your resources aren't. Or perhaps sharing some kind of near miss that shouldn't have been one, but everyone was swamped and they couldn't respond appropriately. Or that the current vendor was a great pick years ago, but not so much anymore because things have changed. Then what you want to do is map these challenges to some costs and risks to the business. Always remember why executives make investments. It's to save money, to earn money, or to reduce risk. So explain what that near miss would have done had it been a full miss. Share how the legacy vendor's lack of solid support put the team in a compromising position during an incident and therefore the company. And then whenever possible, come to the table armed with as much data on relevant threats and risk assessments as you can. So the challenge and cost side of the page here is what you refer to as the before state, before onboarding with the new vendor. Paint this picture first, emotion, emotion, emotion. Next, on the right-hand side, you'll see is the after state. This is what life would be like after moving to the new vendor. So by investing in this solution with a particular vendor, we can expect the following outcomes. And those outcomes should really relate to how the organization will save time, save money, and or reduce risk in that situation. Additionally, here are the new capabilities that we're going to receive that we don't even have today. And if you have a legacy system in place, be sure to emphasize how it cannot deliver those things. Again, great choice when we made it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but it hasn't kept up with the times. I had a VCR 20 years ago. I do not today. There's other choices. VCR was fantastic 20 years ago, not so much anymore. So this model, very simple, but very powerful. And that's the whole point. You don't need a 50-page report. This is what executives need to make decisions. It clearly articulates the problem and risks to the business, and then offers a solution outlining the benefits that will be delivered to the organization, and does so in a way that executives who frankly aren't that educated on all the intricacies of your world, they'll absolutely understand it and appreciate it. So go through several versions of this exercise. The more you refine it, the stronger your message will become. And then don't be tempted to include way too much, because people can only juggle a few things in their brain at a time. Maybe the top 3 to 5 most powerful issues and outcomes that you want to achieve. Feels a little awkward when you do this at first, but the thought exercise that you go through will really help you to, I guess, steelman your case, and then you'll be able to defend it better when you get into those budget meetings. So just to wrap up my part here, a great example of a customer of ours who did just that. So JetBlue probably doesn't need introduction with this audience. I'm sure you know who they are, but many of you might not be aware of their size. They've got a bit over 100 locations that they operate out of and around 24,000 employees. So pretty good sized company. So they were struggling with their legacy vendor because they were forced to use what I call the swivel chair approach. where they had to log into one system to view threats and then turn around to a totally separate system with disconnected data to see who is impacted by problems, and then another system to communicate those threats to people. With such a really dispersed workforce, of which quite a few are constantly on the road, that process was just way too inefficient and suboptimal at best. So their time to message, as Ben was showing before, from that initial detection of an issue to then communicating it out to the impacted individuals, was just really time consuming and too slow. And then the people who needed information quickly were not getting it as fast as they should get it. So as an airline flying in and out of so many locations, they're in constant need of rapid intel and then communication. The weather alone for them creates nightmares for their business. So the faster they can communicate and react, the better experience not only their people will have, but their customers too. So AlertMedia helped them address these issues head on. And then by reading the quote you can see here on the bottom right of the screen, you can see that we actually delivered. And this kind of reflects back to like the NPS scores that you'll hear out there from the different vendors you might be considering. If they're really high, they're probably delivering on things like this. If not, their products are probably outdated and it's not helping people achieve what they need to achieve. So JetBlue now has a really intuitive and easy to use integrated platform that delivers fast, analyst verified threat intel that they can turn into action very quickly, reducing that time to message. And then we provided high touch implementation support to get them moved over very quickly and then remain at their beck and call around the clock in case they need any additional help. So making a change does not have to be scary if you partner with the right vendor. So with that said, done on my part, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ben to close out with some tips for ensuring some seamless transition.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to attempt to land the plane here quickly and safely and leave some time for questions. You're right, change does not have to be scary. There are ways to make a switch seamlessly, but like with anything else in life, it just takes a little bit of preparation and planning. So preparing for the move. First, document your requirements. A lot of the things that we outlined here throughout this session today, and everything from your own internal needs to your expectations of your next partner. Outline your use cases and who all the stakeholders are that are involved. This means how you will use the solution and who will use the solution. Define your implementation milestones, what dates are critical, and work with your vendor to establish success criteria for each one of those milestones. Also identify early wins, when you're going to send your first test notification, when you're going to add it to your employee handbook as a benefit, and so on. Use these as examples to also drive some of those milestones. Meet your implementation and support team and build up a great relationship as you go through the process. And you should also have expectations for your vendor as you approach the migration. These are some of the things that might seem technical at first, but this is what our customers have found the most valuable when they switched to AlertMedia. You don't want to start from scratch, so your vendor should be able to pull system configurations directly from your current provider. Not only your people data, but also your group setup and roles and permissions and different things like that. The data import from your current system should be straightforward and automated. You do not want to have to do this in a manual and without any automation. Don't try that at home. You definitely want to have something that can be synchronized and set up, and then you can check it regularly, but you don't have to continue to keep your eyes on that. Lastly, it should be easy to roll out to new users. Whether your organization has 300 people or 300,000, it should be fast and simple to get those new users, administrators up and running. It's really easy to make software that's hard to use and really hard to make software that's easy to use. So if it's easy to use, that's a good sign that it's a well-made machine, as well as all of the people and processes and services behind it. Ultimately, change does not have to be scary. With the right partner, migration and implementation will be painless and seamless, and you'll be up and running with an intuitive, efficient, and reliable threat intelligence and communication platform in 60 to 90 days or less. With that, I think we have a few minutes left for questions, so we'll open it up.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Ben and Peter. So many great takeaways. We're going to get to questions right away, but I'm going to launch this poll here right a second. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. So folks, we would just love to hear from you really quick. AlertMedia has a team of experienced experts who have worked with organizations during all stages of the selection process. And we would be so happy to talk with you about your specific needs and some of the things you learned today, any specific questions you have. I know we're a little bit tight on time for questions today. So please take a moment to let us know if you would like to hear more about how AlertMedia can help you improve how you monitor and communicate threats at your organization. Yes or not at this time. I'll give a few more seconds here for folks to get some answers in. Peter and Ben, thank you so much for such a great discussion today. I really enjoyed this one and excited to get into some questions and hear some feedback as we move forward.
Yep. Hope we
Oh,
gave people some good food for thought.
absolutely. Okay. I see we've got a couple questions coming through here. Folks, feel free to take a second to add in your questions if you haven't done so already. All right. I'm going to start with the first question here. All right, Peter, I think this one's for you. So if somebody's still in a contract with their current vendor, is it worth taking the time to evaluate if the expiration date seems kind of far off or far in the future? Like, what are your thoughts on like when is it a good time to evaluate?
Yeah, absolutely. The time is going to pass a lot faster than you think. It's really better to have everything reviewed and decided upon early, even if you don't actually move forward till later. So do plan to have some overlap between the solutions just to ensure that you aren't without any kind of coverage, because you don't want that. I mean, any kind of unforeseen incidents might occur that slow your rollout process. You never know. One thing that you do want to check closely is any auto renewal clause in your agreement with the existing vendor. Be sure to provide the proper cancellation notice in the appropriate manner that it calls for, in the appropriate window of time. For example, you might need to provide written notice, literally via snail mail or a courier, 60 to 90 days before the contract expiration date. Otherwise, it then auto renews. So don't get stuck.
Mm, absolutely. That's a great point. Okay, Ben, question here for you. Okay, so it sounds like somebody in the past, they've had to consolidate all their data into one huge master import before they onboarded with their current vendor. You talked about this a little bit during the seamless implementation stuff. How does that work at AlertMedia when it comes to data import? If we've got an organization with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, the exact path for any migration will depend upon the exact systems in use. But with over 3,000 implementations under our belt, our team is very experienced migrating data from various people, notification systems, travel systems, other systems. Um, but it's also important to note that regardless of that, it's not necessary to get all that rounded up into one massive file. Importing can be done incremental. There's support for people, groups, admin permissions, and various other forms of data that can be imported independently. Your people can be batched up in different ways. You can do parts of it and then update that and sync that over time and add different parts as you go. Oftentimes, it's coming from multiple disparate systems, so you can't get it all into one big mega file easily, and that's not the path we would recommend. So we're very proud of the fact that we have the ability to support incremental updates and even tag those in terms of the source systems that they're coming from and whether this should be a complete replacement or augment data that's already there and the ability to easily roll back something if something, say, needs to go to a previous state.
Okay, great. That's a great point. Thank you so much. Peter, question here for you. More specifically on AlertMedia. Do people have to install an app in order to receive emergency communications through AlertMedia? How does that work?
No, not through AlertMedia. The app is optional. It's a fantastic, powerful app, but you can still, even if you don't have it, receive messages through things like text, email, voice call, and other channels as well.
Okay, great. Folks, we are right at our time here today, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly wrap up. Thank you all for being here. We've got some resources that I would love to share with you. If you want to hear more about why JetBlue switched to AlertMedia, check out the video here on our website. You can also learn more about what a switch would look like for your organization by downloading our switch guide here. And I'd just like to thank Ben and Peter. Thank you so much for joining us and giving our audience an insider scoop on the selection process and how to really win with that. Truly is a great takeaways for our organizations attending live today. Folks, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Peter and Ben directly. They'd both be happy to answer you. And also, just let us know if you'd like to learn more. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone for your time that you spent with us today. Really appreciate your participation and engagement. Hope to see you at a future AlertMedia webinar, and keep an eye on your inboxes for the full recording and resources from today. Thanks so much again. Take care and bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.